Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us here at the Department of Buildings. My name is Sarah Desmond. I'm the Executive Director of the Office of the Tenant Advocate. Thank you for joining us to learn how to use DOB resources to counter harassment. I'm joined this afternoon by Salvatore Agostino, who is the Assistant Commissioner for Tenant Protection and Buildings Marshal, Nicole Lopez, who is the Tenant Liaison here with us at the Office of the Tenant Advocate, and Anna Fushinata, who is also a tenant liaison here at the Office of the Tenant Advocate. So tenant harassment is a topic that we take very seriously. If you have any questions during the presentation, we ask that you type them into the Q&A panel. We'll do our best to answer them as the webinar progresses. There'll also be time at the end for a Q&A session at the end. Please note, though, that we cannot answer questions that are specific to a building or your situation. During this webinar, we ask that you contact our office directly by email or by phone number. Both will be posted at the end of the webinar, and we'll be able to engage with you on the specifics of your situation. But thanks, and so before we get started, we're going to take a moment to look at our roadmap for tonight. This is our agenda. It talks about the items that we're planning to talk about in this webinar. Some of it will delve into some specifics, and I trust, judging from the list of attendees, that I know that many of you know many of the things that are here tonight that we're going to discuss. A lot of you have engaged with the Department of Buildings, and we're really happy that you've joined us here tonight for this webinar. If there are any items that we're not covering in this webinar tonight, please let us know, and we'll definitely consider it as a topic for future conversations, because we hope to continue to do webinars and going forward into the future. So before we dive into the specifics of how to use DOB resources to counter harassment, we're going to talk about some stuff about DOB, and I'm going to just stop my video so I'm not distracting the presentation as we're sharing it. So the Department of Buildings is charged with ensuring the safety of more than 1 million buildings across New York City. And of those who live, work, and who build them. We facilitate development consistent with zoning code and the building code. We also conduct emergency response as needed. The Department of Buildings is hold on, there we go. The Department of Buildings organizational chart is now depicted on this slide. You can see that we have more than 1,500 employees, and we're under the leadership of our Commissioner, Melanie LaRocca. The Office of the Tenant Advocate is located in the Tenant Protection Unit, which is a newly created unit, and you can find that in the Enforcement Division here at the Department of Buildings. So under its Building One City plan, DOB is expanding its use of DOB Now, which is an interactive web-based portal that allows DOB staff and users alike to complete all business online. Many of you have probably engaged with DOB Now. We've been implementing it in stages. You've probably used it to pull up DOB filings or to find information on a building. I will be talking more about it tonight, and we'll show you some examples of DOB Now. But by using DOB Now, the department seeks to complete 100% of its transactional business online and to make DOB more accessible and more transparent. Okay. So now diving into the Office of the Tenant Advocate. It was created by Local Law 161 of 2017. It's to provide a central contact point for tenants who have concerns related to construction or other issues under DOB's jurisdiction. At this webinar, we will walk through some typical issues where the Office of Tenant Advocate staff assists New York City tenants and discuss how we work internally and with other city agencies to better protect the tenants that reach out to us and tenants citywide. Our goals at OTA are to target unsafe construction, or to more easily disseminate information, to link tenants with greater resources, and to create more transparency. The Office of the Tenant, as I mentioned, the Office of the Tenant Advocate is a central point of contact for tenants at DOB. And we're organized to receive complaints. You can ask a question. You can raise any construction concerns. We have a published phone number and an email address where tenants can contact us directly. Many of you know this because you've actually reached out to us, and we appreciate that. Help us get the word and help spread our phone number and our email. It will be available at the end of this webinar. We regularly receive complaints that come directly from tenants or tenant advocates, tenant organizers, legal service providers, elected officials, and from other city agencies. So most often, tenants will contact OTA because they're concerned about construction work that's ongoing in their building. So in response, we'll reach out and coordinate tenant safety inspections to inspect for violations of the Tenant Protection Plan, which we'll discuss in more detail later. To inspect for violations of TPPs, but also unsafe construction and work without a DOB-issued permit. The Office of the Buildings Marshal has a dedicated team of inspectors who respond to complaints about Tenant Protection Plan noncompliance. We also coordinate inspections with specialized DOB units like plumbing or electrical, and often with other city agencies if the issues fall outside of the jurisdiction of DOB. This groundwork allows us to identify bad actors who repeatedly engage in construction practices that are unsafe or result in a loss of essential services. So this slide lists many of the city and state agencies with whom we interact the most. Often we'll receive a complaint about construction, and it may include conditions that are covered by other agencies. We may jointly inspect or directly refer to our partner agencies. You can see the list. It's really comprehensive of city agencies with a few state agencies included. And it talks about how DOB will handle maintenance issues, issues related to services or heat or hot water, while DOB handles more construction concerns or building systems. The Department of Health may handle complaints about dust or they may conduct tests for lead. DEP looks after noise issues and also asbestos, and the law department represents DOB in litigation. On the state side, we often refer tenants to DHCR, they may be rent controlled or rent stabilized and have a question about their protections, or the Attorney General will also assist and work with us to investigate landlords. So for example, OTA will receive a complaint from a tenant. It may be a tenant who has a small child who's living in an occupied building. The complaint states that the dust is accumulating in the stairwell. So in addition to inspecting the site to ensure that the Tenant Protection Plan is sufficient for the scope of work that's being done and that the contractor is taking the proper protective measures, DOB will also refer the complaint to DOH-MH, Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, to its Healthy Homes program. DOH will come out to inspect on its own. If dust is present, the inspector will collect dust wipes to test for the presence of lead. And if warranted, will issue a stop work order if there is unsafe practices being followed with the presence of lead. In another example, we may receive a complaint about construction being used as a tool for harassment. During the call, the tenant mentions that the hot water has been off. In this situation, DOB will conduct its tenant safety inspection for Tenant Protection Plan compliance and to look at the conditions on the ground, but will also reach out to the anti-harassment unit at the Department of Housing Preservation and Development. HPD oversees building maintenance and services, including hot water, and our agencies will either jointly inspect or make a direct referral. We're often in contact. We communicate on a daily basis, and we very regularly do inspections with the anti-harassment unit at HPD. So note that even though OTA will make referrals to other agencies, we also ask that tenants place separate 311 complaints. In some cases, the agency that we're referring to requires that they have a separate 311 complaint for tracking, and it's also important because this is part of open data that is logging each of the complaints that you are filing. So additionally, Office of Tenant Advocate participates in more formal city and state task force, including the Tenant Harassment Prevention Task Force. I'll talk about it briefly in response to this slide, but we have a whole section that's dedicated toward the end of the webinar that will go into more detail about the harassment task force. The Tenant Harassment Prevention Task Force consists of a number of city and state agencies, including those that were named on the previous slide, where each of them covers a different jurisdiction. The task force identifies at-risk buildings where we'll use data analytics that's developed from a model that the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics developed for HPD. We'll look at referrals from other city and state agencies, and we receive referrals directly from advocates and from tenants directly. As the task force will convene together to conduct weekly inspections, we're able to address cross-jurisdictional issues. So oftentimes you'll say, maybe an inspector goes out to your building and the Department of Buildings inspector will note that as a maintenance condition. And so you'll either have to make the 311 call to refer to HPD, or the DOB inspector will refer to HPD. In that situation, with the task force, we have both HPD and DOB inspectors handy together on site, so we can address all of these cross-jurisdictional issues at one time. So the task force also conducts, when they conduct the weekly building inspections, we also may look across an owner's portfolio. If we see different trends that are developing, we'll examine the enforcement agencies taken by each agency, and we'll go out and look at each of the properties in that portfolio. We also may bring our own enforcement actions, including criminal summonses against bad actors. And later in this webinar, we'll talk with more and discuss more examples of how the task force collectively won legal settlements against landlords who engaged in tenant harassment practices. As a tenant in New York State, in New York City, you have many rights. This next section will delve into a tenant's rights during active construction in their building. We will look at concerns that are raised by tenants that come to OTA with concerns. We'll examine your right to habitable and safe apartments and what steps and requirements that DOB has put in place to help protect those rights. So we all know that construction can be noisy, dusty, and disruptive. Living in a building that's undergoing renovation can be difficult, but conditions should never be dangerous. In New York State, you have what's called the warranty of habitability, even during construction. The warranty of habitability ensures that your apartment is fit for human habitation and is not subject to dangerous or hazardous conditions that are detrimental to your safety. So DOB has built-in requirements to curb unsafe construction practices and to minimize the impact on existing tenants. So this slide shows most of the common complaints that the Office of the Tenant Advocate receives from tenants about active construction in occupied buildings. It may include, dust, including concerns that are raised about lead or asbestos. It may be concerns about excessive construction noise. We often receive complaints about disruption of essential services, sometimes without notice, and removal of fire-stopping material. And typically we also hear about debris that accumulates in the hallways that poses both an egress issue and also a potential fire hazard, unsafe work practices, and we have questions about whether or not the work being done is subject to a DOB permit. So DOB issues permits for all types of work, and that anything that is not a minor repair. So while sheetrocking may not require a permit, anything that touches your building systems, or examples, construction, plumbing, structural work, mechanical work, electrical work, must all be filed with DOB and obtain a DOB permit. So prior to being issued a permit, an applicant must file with DOB. They must be a licensed professional. They must include the necessary paperwork for that application that includes the scope of work. It must comply with the zoning code, and it must be certified by a Department of Buildings plan examiner, or it could be professionally certified by a licensed professional. So what you see on your screen right here is an example of a DOB permit. that was issued for a construction filing. There's a lot of information on the permit. You can see here it states the location of where the work will occur. That's on the left-hand side. It has the permit number, which is on the upper left-hand side. It talks about the description of the work to be undergone, and that's kind of right across the center. And the professional to whom the permit was issued on the upper right or mid-right. And it also talks about the issue date and the expiration date. And if you look where the red arrows are pointing on the permit, you'll see that there's the total number of units are also indicated, and then the total number of units that will be occupied during construction is also indicated, and this is very important. So additionally, in every occupied building, a safe construction bill of rights is also required for every permit. There's a local law 159 of 2017 that was passed as part of the tenant protection legislation that requires a safe construction bill of rights. It must be posted or distributed to each dwelling unit, and it tells you a description of the work that's being done. It tells you a description of the essential service disruptions and the length of time for each disruption. It talks about the hours that construction will be underway. It talks about the estimated completion date, and it includes contacts, both emergency contacts for things that happen during construction or for just questions or concerns that are non-emergency matters. And finally, it directs you to how to file a complaint and where to file it. Okay. Additionally, a tenant protection plan is required before a permit is issued for any partial demolition, alteration, or construction filing, where one or more unit is occupied during construction, and it doesn't matter where the construction is actually occurring. If the construction is occurring in the commercial space or a vacant unit, or if it's in an occupied unit or the public hallways. If it's happening in that building and there's more than one unit that's occupied, it requires a tenant protection plan. The tenant protection plan must be prepared by an architect who's hired by the general contractor and certified by the owner. In the next few slides, we'll review the administrative code requirements for what must be included in a tenant protection plan to protect tenants during construction or renovation. So the tenant protection plan is comprised of 7 essential items. They're shown on your screen. Each TPP must be specific to the site. So this is actually very important. The tenant protection plan must be specific to the site and the work that's being done. It cannot say terms like code compliant, legal, or required by law. It has to talk in detail about the actual work being done and the site on which it's happening. So, for example, the first element is an egress. If egress is impacted by the work being done, the tenant protection plan must sufficiently detail how egress will be maintained, and they may have to attach plans if necessary. For fire safety, if a tenant protection plan should address the location of a fire extinguisher, or if a sprinkler or other fire suppression system is taken out of service, it must address that. If fire stopping is removed and cannot be immediately restored, it must detail when it will be restored and the provisions such as a fire watch if needed. Additionally, for health requirements, this is where an owner or a contractor must specify the methods that they will use for dust control or containment. They must talk about things like the frequency of debris disposal, pest control and sanitary facilities if they'll be disrupted. And they, for example, we often see tenant protection plans that will state that they use zippered doors on each unit that's under construction. They'll use sticky mats to try to control dust that is going out into the public hallways. They'll do wet mopping on different intervals. They'll use a HEPA vacuum cleaner, one on each floor or on the floor that's being worked on. Under health requirements, it also should specifically refer to lead and asbestos. As part of the filing requirements with the Department of Buildings, an owner must file what's called their asbestos control program, form filing, which is filed with DEP, and it shows that, the units, the areas that are going to be tested, are going to be construction's going to occur, have actually been tested for asbestos. That if there's asbestos present, it needs to state that, and it needs to state how they're complying with the requirements of the agencies that oversee lead and asbestos abatement. For the housing maintenance code, they must show that housing standards will be maintained during construction. Under structural, they'll indicate that there are no dangers, no structural work will be undertaken that endangers any of the tenants. For noise restrictions, they must detail steps that are taken to comply with the noise code. So each job must file a noise mitigation plan with DEP, Department of Environmental Protection. DEP oversees noise issues. They have the tools, they'll come out and actually do monitoring of noise. They'll take decibel levels for that, and they require that for each job that's filed, that online, they have an online form that an owner must complete a noise mitigation form. Details of that mitigation plan should be included in the tenant protection plan, showing what steps they're taking to limit noise on the construction site. And finally, with respect to essential services, the tenant protection plan must be specific about the disruption to services. It must talk about the length of the disruption. It talks about steps that were taken to minimize the disruption, provide notification to the tenants, and provision of sufficient alternatives. For example, we saw an example where an owner had to disrupt the water for a period of a morning, and in that situation, they provided drinking water to the tenants, and they provided advance notification so the tenants could collect water, and they also provided non-potable water as well. So that's just examples of things that can be included in a tenant protection plan. So shown here is, so I had talked earlier in the presentation, we talked about how DOB was transitioning to a new web-based portal called DOB Now. So currently, DOB is currently using two different tenant protection forms. It depends on the type of job, and it depends when it was filed. Roughly, the older jobs are filed in the Building Information System, or BIS, that many of you may know, and then newer filings are shown in DOB Now. So I'm going to show you what the tenant protection plan looks like in BIS, and it's going to take a minute to load. Okay, so in the older filings that were filed with BIS, Building Information Systems, the applicants were required to complete a TPP1 form. This is the TPP1 form that's shown on your screen, and you'll see that it has all of the 7 elements that we just discussed in the last slide, and it talks about the specifics of what must be included in the tenant protection plan. You'll see that it also includes location information and the information with respect to the specific apartments that will be occupied during construction, and the total number of dwelling units to be occupied during construction. The second page of the TPP1 form shows, requires that if there are attachments such as plans or additional pages, they must indicate that on the form. It also has an owner statement and signature that must be signed, and it has an applicant statement and signature, which is the design professional who is hired by the general contractor to complete the tenant protection plan. So that's BIS. That's the form that shows in BIS, and I'm going to show to you a couple of screenshots, and then this is the form that's shown in DOB Now. If you can see it, it may show up fairly small on your screen, but it addresses the same 7 essential items, but it's done as a fillable form that's online, and it's available publicly as well as the BIS form. So if you look at this, will come back to how you actually navigate to these forms later in the presentation. So every landlord must notify the Department of Buildings before they start work on a job that requires a tenant protection plan. So DOB has created an online fillable form that contractors must complete and submit 72 hours prior to starting work. And we're going to look at this form just briefly. Okay, so on the screen you'll see there's the owner notification of the start of work requiring a tenant protection plan. It has the information of the location of the building, it has the owner's information, and it has the job number, and includes the date and time that they'll start work. So the owner must submit this if there's one or more occupied units in a building, and the building is a partial demolition, alteration, or construction application. They must, and requires the tenant protection plan, they must submit that notification to DOB. Those notifications go to the Office of the Buildings Marshal, which is the office charged with inspecting tenant protection plan compliance. So OBM, or the Office of the Buildings Marshal, will inspect, under the law, will inspect more than 10% of all jobs that require a 72-hour notification. I think overall they probably inspect significantly more than 10% of those jobs, and those are considered proactive inspections. Okay. And additionally, a contractor is required to post in a building a notice of a tenant protection plan for occupants. I'm going to click on that too, so you can see this. Nope. All right. So there we go. There's the notice of tenant protection plan. It notifies tenants that there's been a job filed and that requires a tenant protection plan, and that tenant protection plan is available to tenants. This notice must be posted in the lobby and within 10 feet of elevators and the main stairwells. It also must be served on each occupied unit. The TPP notice informs the tenants just that there is a tenant protection plan available and how they can obtain a copy. It's important to note that the actual tenant protection plan form is not posted. It's only the notice of the tenant protection plan. Okay, so give me 1 minute here. Okay. So there's a few ways where a tenant can obtain a copy of an entire tenant protection plan. First is the owner must provide a paper copy of the tenant protection plan upon request. It's also available on DOB's website. So these next screens kind of walk you through how to obtain a copy of the TPP from both BIS and from DOB Now. So bear with me as we go through this process. I understand, that if you haven't used the BIS portal or the DOB Now portal, it can be a little daunting at first. So that's why my office is here to help. If you need assistance getting a copy of a tenant protection plan, you can reach out to us and we'll help you access the tenant protection plan. So for the BIS jobs, so building information systems job, you can see that if you click on the link that's in this presentation, it will bring you to this page that's shown on the left-hand side. And you need to, at this point, enter the borough, the street address, or alternatively, if you happen to know the job filing number with DOB, you can enter that under line 9, and then you click go. If you bear with me 1 minute, I'm going to go back one screen, and I'm going to walk you through that process by doing it online live with you. Okay. So the link didn't work, so we're going to go straight through. I'm going to walk you right through it. So we enter the borough, the address, the borough, the street address under number 1, and you click go. it will bring you to this, to the image on the right, in which it's called the property profile. So the property profile, if you've never looked at it, actually includes a lot of information that you're going to want to look at, but if you scroll down to the bottom, you can see about under the gray line, about third from the bottom, it says jobs and filings. Okay. If you there we go. So if you click on the job number on the that you see, you can look at the list, you can find the job number that you need. You click on the job number, and it will take you to the image that you see on the right, where it's the actual filing for that job number. On the bottom, at the top, it will have a series of 5 columns with a bunch of clickable hyperlinks. You'll see one of them is the virtual job folder. You can click on the virtual job folder, and it will take you to everything that's been filed for that job. So if you look here on the one that we're looking at on the screen, about, I'd say about 6, 7 applications down, you'll see it says the Tenant Protection Plan and Notes. If you click on that, it actually opens up into the Tenant Protection Plan, and you can actually see what was filed for your job, for the job that's in your building. Okay. So for the DOB Now portal, it's a similar process to the it's just a different system. So if you click on the link that's on the website or in this webinar, you enter the street address and you enter the borough as well. If you know the job number, alternatively, you can enter the job number as well. So scrolling down on once you enter the job number and you click submit, you'll see it'll bring you to a series of options on the property profile. You'll see there's a schedule occupancy, and then you'll see the build job filing. If you click on the build job filings, it will open up into the screen that you see on your screen right now, and it will list all of the jobs that are currently were filed with DOB Now inspection, DOB Now. And if you click on one of those links, like you find the job number that you need and you click under the view, it will open up into everything that was filed for that job. So you can look at anything from the plan work application to the zoning information on it. And if you follow that all the way down, you'll see circled in red is the Tenant Protection Plan. If you click on that, you'll see an online interactive link that will have the complete tenant protection plan for that job. So we're going to pause for 1 minute, and I'm going to turn the controls over to my colleague, Anna Plucinata, here at the Department of Buildings.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anna Plucinata. I am a tenant liaison at the Office of the Tenant Advocate. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I will be here talking to you about the Tenant Protection Plan and what it really does for the building and all of its tenants. So why is a TPP necessary? So the next 3 slides are going to show conditions from actual job sites where the Office of the Buildings Marshal, which I will later refer to as OBM, issued stop work orders and violations for failure to comply with a TPP or for an insufficient TPP. So for example, in this image here, you will see that there are some boxes containing flammable debris and just things that are blocking the path there that is not allowable under the TPP. as well as the fire protection, which is missing from that wall there. As you can see, the exit sign is placed, however, the arrow itself is pointing towards a wall, which is obviously not an exit way. And the protective barrier meant to keep the dust from entering other areas of the building is actually broken, so therefore ineffective. So over here we have, again, these are actual pictures that our inspectors have taken from active construction sites. The open wood joists at the top there's no fire protection there, and the excessive debris on the ground is just not protected and well closed off, which leads to the dust entering other areas, not protecting the tenants. The Office of the Buildings Marshal has a dedicated TPP inspection team, which is OBM, Office of the Buildings Marshal. They conduct both proactive and complaint-driven inspections. We proactively inspect more than 10% of the job filings, which require a 72-hour notification. Inspectors will review whether the TPP is sufficient for the scope of work proposed. They will also inspect if the work is in compliance with the TPP. So, for example, if the TPP requires zipper doors on each unit, or if it requires a HEPA vacuum per floor, OBM will always ensure that these provisions are actually in place at the site. They will also ensure that the contractor is using safe work practices. OBM will also inspect complaints received by OTA or forwarded by 311. Most complaints are inspected within that same day. So some possible outcomes of an inspection vary according on the type of TPP violation. Typically, enforcement options for failure to file a TPP or there's an insufficient TPP are shown on your screen here. Penalties and fines are related to the severity of the offense. So as you can see, if they fail to file a TPP, a stop work order can be issued and an oath ECB violation. And there are the financial penalties. And for an insufficient TPP, the stop work order, a violation, and a referral to have the application audited. These next two slides are a list of possible citations related to TPP noncompliance. So if they fail to post the TPP on site, or if they are found to be violating the TPP. For example, they're not maintaining the housekeeping, they're not maintaining the construction site nice and clean and safe, or if they are not maintaining the building in a code compliant manner. These are some additional infractions here. So if they submit a false PW1, which is the plan work application, if they fail to notify the DOB 72 hours prior to work beginning, or some other types, some work without a permit, failure to safeguard, and fire stopping contrary to code. OBM will issue a stop work order based on the hazardous conditions observed. If the TPP is insufficient for the scope of work observed, OBM will refer the job to audit by the newly created OTA plan exam team for insufficient TPP. Referrals are routinely made to other city agencies if conditions under their jurisdiction are observed. For example, dust complaints are referred to Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, or DOHMH. Now, depending on the conditions present at the time of the inspection, OTA can refer the complaint to one of its city or state partners for an inspection, possible assistance, or investigation. Typically, we refer to a number of different agencies, for example, DHCR, on matters related to rent stabilization or rent control. We also refer to HPD, which is Housing Preservation and Development, for housing maintenance issues, harassment complaints, possible litigation, and issues related to the Certificate of No Harassment program. We refer buildings to HPD for emergency repair program as well, if owners fail to make the emergency repair. And again, we also refer to DOHMH for testing if dust is present. In addition to concerns about construction, OTA also responds to complaints of service disruptions that are under DOB's jurisdiction. Most commonly, OTA receives complaints about gas outages and elevator disruptions. Generally, any modification to a building system requires a VOB permit, including gas or plumbing work, elevators, boilers, and electrical work. To report unsafe conditions or complaints, tenants should call 311 to request an inspection by the respective DOB unit. For example, DOB's plumbing unit, elevator unit, and boiler unit. So once a 311 complaint is placed, 311 will then dispatch it to the appropriate unit. In most cases, restoration of these services requires a DOB permit. OTA helps tenants track permit status. The timeline for restoration depends on how well the owner addresses the items listed. And it will vary depending on the extent of the problem that caused the shutdown and how much work is involved, how quickly the owner files to restore the work, and if they are able to gain access to the affected units. It's also important that tenants place a 311 service outage complaint. An HPD inspector will visit your home and, if warranted, will place a violation for the lack of services. If services are not restored timely, tenants should contact 311 for a referral to legal services. So I know I talked a lot about 311 recently, and I just want to take this time to give everybody a brief overview on how to submit 311 complaints online. Just as a reminder, you can always call 311, but the service is available online as well. So once you go to 311 online, it'll take you to the home page, which is that first image there labeled number 1 that says, how can we help you? To the right, you will see 3 yellow buttons. One says report problems, the second look up service request, and the third make payments. The way to file a 311 complaint online, you would hit that first one, report problems. It'll then take you to that second screen, and up top there, you'll be able to see that it says most popular, all by category, and all A to Z. You want to hit that all by category, so all of the available categories for the 311 online system are made available to you. If you're making a complaint for your apartment building, or for your neighborhood, you'd want to scroll down to that housing and building section. And then it'll take you to the third image that says buildings and property. And that's where you want to go for any sort of building complaint. Now I want to take you, we could do this process together so you could see what it is that we are referring to. So this is the 311 online portal. It says, how can we help you? So over here, you'll see report problems, look up service requests, and make payments. So report problems is where you make your complaint. Look up service requests is once you already have your 311 number. Once you've already made a complaint, you could then track it by using the lookup service request option. So we're going to hit report problems. It's loading up there. Perfect. And you see, like I said, it's going to automatically take you to that most popular. What you want to do is hit all by category. So you see all of the available categories for you to make a complaint about. So for construction-related items, you're going to go down to housing and buildings, and then we're going to hit buildings and property. So these are all of the available complaints that you can make against your building or property. Please note that just because it's under this category, it does not mean that it would automatically be dispatched to the Department of Buildings. It's just a matter of the nature of your complaint. So we're going to hit building construction complaint because we are the Department of Buildings, so we want to get something for us. So once you want to make a building construction complaint, you can hit, maybe there's work going on that they don't have a permit out for. So you can hit this, and then it'll take you to where you can report your problem. I hope I'm not going too fast for anybody. So then you would just follow through. You would enter all of the details. You would enter the time that it was observed as for the nature of the complaint. Then once you hit next, it'll take you to where, which means you would enter the address, maybe in a specific apartment, maybe a specific location of the building that you'd be able to enter. You can also submit some photos and maybe some video footage as evidentiary support for your claim. Then for who? Depending on the nature of the complaint, you may need to put in your actual contact information in order for the inspector to then be able to contact you once they are dispatched for inspection. Other complaints you can make completely anonymously. It's just dependent on what you are filing the complaint for. And then once you hit review, you'll be able to see all of your entries, and then you'll be able to submit it, and you will get your 311 service request number. It is very important for you to jot that number down. That way, when you want to track it, you have that available to you. So DOB takes safety very seriously, and we issue a vacate order if a condition poses imminent dangers. This slide lists the conditions under which DOB will issue a vacate order. DOB vacate orders are posted in a prominent place, and details are provided on the posted vacate order, and you can request additional information from the DOB construction unit in the borough where the building is located. So these are all examples of what would be considered an unsafe location. This brochure is on DOB's website. It includes resources and phone numbers for assistance if you are vacated from your home. It also includes the most frequently asked questions, such as how to secure emergency housing, how to access your belongings, and what if the owner does not correct the conditions that got them the vacate order. So I would encourage everyone to go on our DOB website and just review this vacate order, and so you have that information readily available. When contacted by a tenant subject to a vacate order, our office will investigate the vacate order and determine the cause and apartments that were affected by it. We will also contact the tenants with the process to obtain their possessions if possible, connect them with HPD, which is Housing Preservation and Development, for emergency shelter through the American Red Cross, and we will also refer them to 311 for legal services. For rent-regulated tenants, we will refer to DHCR to file to reduce the rent to $1 per month for the duration of the vacate order. And here are some additional resources for tenants that are subject to a vacate order. So everyone, I'm now going to turn over the presentation to my colleague, Nicole Lopez. I want to thank you all for your attendance, and I hope everyone stays safe.
Hi, everyone. Nicole Lopez here, formerly Nicole Vargas. I'm going to talk a little bit about harassment. I am a tenant liaison on Sarah's team here at DOB. Some of you are familiar to me and I to you, so welcome. I'm going to just start off and say sometimes construction in your building may become a deliberate attempt at harassment. The section of our presentation shares how OTA and DOB may be able to help. This slide explains an OTA's investigation of tenant harassment. OTA receives complaints from tenants, attorneys, or elected officials. We also receive referrals from other DOB units and or city or state agencies. As part of an investigation, we will review DOB records, permits, complaints, and violations. We also reach out to the tenant for more information. Based on the nature of the complaint, OTA may refer to the DOB Office of the Buildings Marshal to conduct a tenant safety inspection or a joint inspection with a specialized DOB unit or other city agency. We also reach out to city and state agencies about tenant conditions in matters relevant to their jurisdiction. For example, DHCR is the state agency that oversees rent stabilized and rent controlled statuses. HPD, also known as Housing Preservation and Development, does maintenance and building services and also has litigation history. DOHMH, Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, for dust complaints or other hazards, and DEP, Department of Environmental Protection, for asbestos and noise issues. In some cases, we may refer it to the New York State Attorney General's office and or the New York City Law Department if further investigation is warranted. Depending on the findings, OTA may take additional investigative steps, including referring to the Tenant Harassment Prevention Task Force for a multi-agency inspection. Additionally, OTA will research other properties under the same ownership to identify trends across a property portfolio. And we will connect the tenant with resources such as legal services or other agencies. These are actual photos from a recent inspection by OBM of an occupied Brooklyn apartment. The Office of the Building Marshal is part of the Tenant Protection Unit at DOB. OBM has a dedicated team that inspects for tenant safety and compliance. They also participate in the Tenant Harassment Prevention Task Force. They investigate unlicensed contractors. They inspect complaints of tenant harassment. They conduct Tenant Protection Plan inspections and DOB liaison to interagency enforcement measures. As we mentioned, both OTA and OBM participate as VOB's representatives on the Tenant Harassment Prevention Task Force. The Tenant Harassment Prevention Task Force consists of a number of city and state agencies with different jurisdictions. Participating agencies are shown on this slide. The Harassment Task Force was created to investigate and bring enforcement actions, including criminal charges, against landlords who harass tenants by creating unsafe living conditions through illegal construction. The task force primarily handles matters that impact a large number of rent-regulated tenants where actions by an owner may rise to criminally. The task force brings together the collective power of the city and state to protect tenants. And this is for all 5 boroughs. The next 3 slides detail successful harassment cases commenced on behalf of the Tenant Harassment Prevention Task Force and include, in 2019, the New York State Attorney General announced a settlement for tenant harassment by landlord Rafael Toledano that included $3 million in damages and the appointment of an independent management company to manage his properties. In 2017, the Attorney General also indicted landlord Dean Galazzo for mortgage fraud. This slide shows press releases for 2 more settlements against Icon Management and landlord Sammy Mafar as a result of the Tenant Harassment Prevention Task Force investigation. And finally, in 2017, the New York State Attorney General obtained a guilty verdict against landlord Daniel Melamed for unlawful eviction of rent-stabilized tenants. The next few slides depict VOB's maps and other tools for you to use to research construction in the vicinity of your home. After-hour variances, or AHVs, are where DOB has granted permission to work outside of the standard hours, 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday. To file a complaint about after-hour work, you can always call 311. We do have a 24-hour unit that do check these complaints, or go out on these complaints, I should say. The map shows all jobs by addresses where an after-hour variance has been granted. This interactive tool allows you to look up construction on your block or by community board. Finally, if you wish to track a job at DOB, you can sign up for job status notifications. You must look up the job number to receive the notification. You will receive weekly email alerts notifying you of the official DOB job status, i.e. if it's been approved, if the permit's been issued, if it's been signed off. This is all public knowledge.
So thank you all for joining us tonight. You have our contact number. It's here on the screen right now, so feel free to reach out. And please let others know that this resource exists. We're relatively new. We're definitely want to get the word out, and I think it's a place where you can contact us directly, and we answer the phone, or if we don't answer the phone, we'll call you back within a couple hours. So feel free to reach out. Please do. I want to, again, thank everyone for joining us tonight. It was a really important discussion, and I appreciate your patience with us as we went through our technical issues. So thank you very much, and have a good evening.